Regenerative agriculture is the sort of term that everybody's using at the moment. I still think there's quite a lot of head scratching about what it means. And like with organic, it's quite well defined, so everybody knows what is organic and what versus what is not organic. We need something broadly similar in terms of we need to bottom out what does regenerative mean. Is it super intensive farming but just with a bit of carbon extra in the soil, or is it much more holistic kind of farming methods, and both at the moment are under the same umbrella? Where's it going to go? Well, in the long run, unless we get better at preserving our natural capital in our farmlands, our food system will really break. So in the long run, we've got to do this better. So the hope would be that before our food system really falls apart, regenerative approaches are really tackled and grow at scale. Well, if you think about it, our food system policy is often towards driving economic growth. If we have economic growth, so a positive GDP, that means that we are, as consumers, consuming more exponentially year on year. Ultimately, if you have exponential growth in resources and you have a finite planet, at some point those two come into crash. And so we can imagine situations where we've lost the biodiversity, so we can't do any pollination. We've degraded the soils, so yields start going down. We've driven the climate, so yields start going down. There are lots of ways that just driving the land harder and harder and harder sow the seeds of agriculture's destruction in the long run, or at least its degradation in the long run. And so hopefully the market signals that regenerative approaches regenerate the natural capital and build resilience into changing weather patterns, etc. Hopefully all of that will, in the long run, make it much more profitable for a farmer to adopt the methodologies, and therefore it scales up naturally without it being a kind of a social movement, which is slightly how it feels at the moment. There are a lot of opportunities for farmers. I think there is a growing market amongst certainly some segments of society for eating less but better, eating higher quality, moving away from hyper-processed foods and eating locally sourced, slow-growing, regenerative stuff that embodies the values of the countryside that people hold quite dear in this country. So I think there is a market there, and part of the challenge is how does an individual farmer access that market. And in the old days, that market for that individual farmer would have to be local, selling into local shops. Nowadays, that market can be global because of the way that we can direct sell much easier. But there is still an issue of scale. A single farmer can't necessarily produce year-round to drive that market to really suck material far and wide. So there is a market building piece that comes from farmers, rather than just working as sole enterprises, getting together as groups of regenerative farmers to supply different products at different parts of the year, to provide products at a large enough scale that they can go into a local supermarket instead of a local corner store, for example. And so it's not just about a farmer learning regenerative agriculture, which is in itself a challenge, but it's also about that farmer being part of the market growth that will support their industry, their enterprise into the future.